I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors over at Jim Dunlop and MXR Pedals. We couldn't be luckier to have these guys on board with us. I personally use these products, and you should too. Find out more about them at jimdunlop.com. Let's get on to the podcast. Hey guys, this is Zach from the Anti-Heroes podcast, and I want to welcome our newest sponsor to the show, DistroKid. DistroKid helps musicians get their music on all the major streaming platforms, and artists keep 100% of their royalties. Can you believe that? Anti-Heroes listeners get 30% off at distrokid.com/VIP/antiheroes. Again, that's distrokid.com/VIP/antiheroes. Thank you so much, and support all the folks at DistroKid because they're doing amazing work, and we couldn't be happier to have them on board. Hello and welcome to the Anti-Heroes podcast with your host, Zach Blair. I am Zach Blair. How are you doing today, people? Today, I get to talk to a guy named Jonathan Hischke. Now, Jonathan Hischke is almost, sadly, what Jonathan Hischke does has almost gone the way of the buffalo. He is basically a session musician. I met the guy because he plays in a band called Cigar that on Fat Records. We did a festival together, hardcore punk festival. That's where I've seen this guy because that band Cigar is like that. But Jonathan, man, his career reads like just a musical all-star list. The guy has played with everybody, as we talk about in this episode, from Nels Cline to Zach Hill, Nora Jones. The guy's done it all, to Broken Bells with Danger Mouse, and he's really to Hella. He's got such an immense dossier, if you will. It's very impressive. He's one of the real deals, man. He's a real musician. He is a professional bassist in the utmost sense of the word. As I do with guys like this, we end up just picking each other's brains and going down many rabbit holes. That's one of the reasons I love doing this. I love making new friends. We talk about John's got a solo record coming out. I believe it came out today. I don't know when this will air, but do yourself a favor and go down a deep dive on Jonathan Hischke. So I'm going to shut up and let you listen to my interview with Jonathan Hischke. Is it Jonathan or John? Like, what do you prefer?
Well, my dad's John. So
okay, gotcha.
So I ended up with the longer version.
You got to be Jonathan. Okay, Jonathan yeah. It is. We were just talking about being hemmed in creatively with music and things like that. And that is something you absolutely are not. For those uninvolved, my guest today is Jonathan Hischke. And I'm glad I'm pronouncing that correctly. And you are a professional bassist that sessions lots of bands, lots of creative work. I met you with the band Cigar, which is, predominantly, like, say, I guess, for lack of a better term, and I hate to categorize anything, but punk rock. And we have played some festivals with that. But Jesus Christ, you've played with Nels Cline, you've played with Marnie Stern, you played with Zach Hill. I have creative FOMO, I guess we could say, of your career. And I guess that is the true hallmark of an amazing musician, that you can sort of navigate your way in and out of all these different genres. And that's what I always wanted to do myself. How did it all get started for you? Were you a guy that wanted to be a bass player first and foremost, or were you a guitar player that switched to bass? How did that start?
Well, I should start by saying that I come from like a musical family. My father has a master's degree in music and is a jazz. Well, he plays all kinds of instruments, but he's a woodwind player mostly.
Wow.
Plays saxophone and came from jazz and rock and roll too, but knows jazz and studied it. So I was started pretty early in music as far as I played piano, I played trombone, in band in school. And around...
I did too, actually. I played...
What's that?
I did too. I played trombone in band, which is crazy.
Is that right? Oh, no
Yeah,
kidding.
I mean, for like a year, I don't remember anything about it. But go ahead.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. So I did that for a long time. I mean, I did that all the way through high school. Even I guess when I was around 13 or so, I got bitten by like the MTV bug or whatever it was.
Sure.
The rock music, pop music bug, and I remember going to my dad and telling him I wanted to start playing a cool instrument.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I want to play electric guitar or drum kit or whatever. And he had this big long talk with me where he was like, okay. And he went through every instrument and explained why I shouldn't play any of those, but why I should play bass. The main part about bass was that it was like you'd always have a gig,
Right.
someone always needed one. And he thought my personality would fit the role.
Your dad's a working musician, so that's how working musicians think. Like
Yeah.
you're always going to have a gig. You know what I mean? You're always going to
Yeah.
work,
Yeah.
and I love that.
And he was right up until maybe, the very current moment.
Right, right,
I
right,
mean,
right.
not saying that I'm not busy, but just, in the world as rock music is kind of ebbing, kind of in a,
Sure.
but
It always does, though.
I know, I
It
know,
always does.
we don't have to talk about AI or anything on this one.
Right, 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 right.
Yeah, I mean, he was just like, oh, there's so many guitar players. I mean, it was very like he had a very utilitarian kind of approach about the personalities involved. He's like, lead singers are so full of themselves. You're not like that. And drummers, they have to carry too much stuff. I mean, it was literally like down to that kind of
I mean,
thinking.
he's right.
As I've gotten older, I realized it's pretty much exactly on
Yeah.
point, all the things he said.
Everything is. You got to listen to the elder statesmen, man. You got to listen. They've been around. They know it. It's funny because if kids ask me nowadays, like any questions, I'm always just like, I don't fucking know. Like the musical landscape has changed so drastically from your dad's generation to yours. It's like, okay, you want to be a working musician? Here's what you do. Here's what you don't do. Blah. Now it's changed so completely drastically. Like, I don't know how to tell a kid to. What am I going to tell him how to work social media? I don't fucking know. For
Yeah.
me, it's like put all your shit in storage and get in a van and go and play every night until people are showing up. I don't, that's how I did it. I don't know if that's how you fucking still do it. I don't think it is,
I No, I think you make yourself a brand and get
Sure.
followers, and yeah, I'm from the exact same approach that you are, and it
Yeah.
was always about another piece of my dad's advice was you just play with everyone who comes at you, like just say
Sure.
yes, and I
And you
have.
did. And you have. And I want to get into that. So that was a concerted effort. That was my next question. So that was a concerted effort on your part to like, okay, I'm not going to go for any one specific genre because some people do that. They like metal. So they are going to focus on metal and they're going to play in a metal band that might tour with another band. They play in that band and they've made their career that way.
Right.
Which, I mean, hey, if you're a working musician, good on you.
And as well, can I just jump in? As well,
Absolutely.
it's like I never, I don't know if I ever had that passion for one type of music to that point where it created my identity. I
Right.
kind of wish I had in a way,
Right.
because I admire people who like embody the thing that they do. I mean, like, legit old blues dudes, legit like jazz cats or whatever. I mean, there's something to that.
When I first moved to Austin, most all my closest friends were working blues musicians. And that was the
Really.
first time, yeah, a guy named Nick Curran, who's since passed, RIP, but he was a phenom. He was playing with the Fabulous Thunderbirds when I met
Mm.
him, and he was a kid, but he was kind of like a punk rocker. It was really odd. And he sang like Little Richard, and he played guitar like Jimmy Vaughn. He was unbelievable.
He sounds incredible.
Yeah, we had a band together right before I joined Rise Against, actually. And that guy we would just be sitting there having lunch, and he would get called every night just to go play with a group of guys he had never met. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. And they would just play standards, and that was what he did. He refused to get a day job. That's how he worked. Gary Clark, everybody knows Gary Clark Jr. He was one of those guys as well. We'd all, sitting there, their phones would start going off. They were going to go and work that night. And I just, coming from a punk rock and a metal background, I was fascinated by this. And I was always fascinated by blues music as well. My dad was a huge fan, and growing up in Texas, it was hard to get away from it. But what I was going to say is, I think in service of playing music, there is no better job. And so I really respect, you were saying that you sort of admire the guy that sort of focused on one thing and stuck with that music or whatever. And those guys have done that as well. And, you know, there's ups and downs to both things. I think, it speaks to your sort of musical breadth that you can go and jump in a lot different genres. Some people just, man, they want to be a musician so bad and they've only focused on one thing. I know shredder metal guys that can't play rhythm guitar. They just
Right.
can't do it. A
Right.
lot of those YouTube guitar players that are so fucking mind-blowingly amazing, you can tell their right hands just, you know, and this, I'm not calling out anybody, but like they just never worked on their rhythm. So there is pitfalls to both. I admire what you have done, you know, and I know there's probably like lean moments and there's things like that, like shit, you
Oh,
know, but goddamn, it speaks to a voracious musical appetite, I guess we could say.
I appreciate that, and I suppose you're right. I mean, it's again, you know, as soon as I said that about, there's a part of me that definitely admires those people who are lifer musicians to their calling, let's say, and
Yeah,
their genre calling. And I have done a bunch of different things, kind of within a broader genre, I guess, of rock
sure.
music or something. But it's funny because at this point, I don't really know what's going on out there. I don't listen to a ton of new music. I'm not out there
Right.
like going to shows every night. So, in my own way, I've kind of become one of those guys who's like, I don't play any other instruments either, really. I mean, I can mess
Right.
around. I'm not really like a multi instrumentalist by any stretch, you know?
Sure.
So, it's like I have my own version of that I don't know if limitation's the right word, but that I'm on my own road, like
Right.
kind of like
Right.
those guys were, just not genre wise necessarily.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I guess it just happens maybe at some point, you know?
Your name's gotten around enough as being the player you are and consistent and showing up on time and easy to work with and stuff, you know, those bigger gigs sort of happen. Well, was that your goal originally, to be a session guy, or was your idea in the first place like, I'm going to join one specific band and that's what I'm going to do?
I always thought the coolest thing would be to be a session guy and to be the MacGyver of music.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Carol Kane or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, Carol
Yeah.
Kay, she's amazing. But it kind of turned out I'm kind of somewhere in between, where it's like I feel like most of the stuff that I do, my best work in are bands and
Right.
collaborations and things that I kind of like have a hand in creating. And I do work for other people. Obviously, I get hired and I go on
Yeah.
tour a lot, you know, either as a fill-in person or as filling the bass
Right.
role,
Right.
and do sessions, whatever. But I feel like the stuff I'm most proud of is the stuff where I kind of had some creative impetus from the beginning of it
Right.
or early in it, you know, as opposed to just showing up and like, okay, this song's kind of a 70s blues jam vibe,
Right.
you know, kind of like a cross between the band and the Allman Brothers, you know, do it maybe with flat wound, a hollow body with flat, you know, I,
Yeah.
I can kind of get through some of those things, but I feel like I'm better at seeing it and taking my own approach.
Where they want you to be you, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
And I don't even know what that means exactly. I don't know what being me is, but I guess there is a an answer at the end of it. Like I know when I hear something back, I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, that I got in there.
That's an interesting point because, you know, I've often in my own career, I'm like, who am I? Like, what do I do specifically? There are those people that, you know, them, they have such a definitive thing they do on their instrument, and that's
Right.
so admirable. And I've, you know, interviewed a few of those people on this podcast, and it is quantifiable because, you know, you sort of question that in your own self, and then you listen back to something, and let's say it's a collaboration, you know, where you're playing with other people or whatever, you know yourself. You might be playing the same thing everybody else is playing, that same pass,
Right.
but you know when it's you playing. And
Right.
you can't really put your finger on it, even though it's yourself. You're like, I don't know what I'm bringing to the table, but I know I'm bringing something, you know.
Yeah,
There
exactly.
is a
And
signature.
right, you can hear your own dialect or something.
Sure.
Now that I'm thinking about it, it's like, okay, maybe I bumped around the road of like wanting to be like an ace and then kind of
Sure.
ending up being a collaborator and a band guy. I think for me, in a way, besides like the person who's like the lifer jazz guy or whatever, maybe the best place to shoot for is to be the person with a signature who can then apply themselves to
To
gigs
other
and
things.
gets hired. Like I'm trying to think of an example. There's some guitar players, Mark Rebo.
Okay. Right. Right.
You know
Right. Right.
Mark Rebo?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, he's my
I'd love
favorite
to.
guitar
I'd love to
player.
talk to Mike Rico.
He's probably pretty easy to get a hold of. He loves to talk. I've met him a few times. He's
I'd love to talk to him. But you're right. You're right. Very signature. You know, Mark Rebo.
yeah. It's like I feel like people don't hire him to be an everyman or even to be a guitar player to do the guitar role. They hire him to be Mark Rebo and bring that creativity and that thing
Mm-hmm.
to and I mean that's not even there's guys like that or players like that in every genre. I mean Eddie Van Halen's like that. You know what I
Sure,
mean?
you're great point. But then there's somebody like Robert Fripp, who from Brian Eno to he played with Blondie. He's on a
Yeah,
Blondie track, and when he plays, it's like that's fucking Robert Fripp. So
right.
people did hire him to be Robert Fripp.
Exactly. And Ballou, Adrian Ballou's the same way.
Absolutely, Baloo's the same way.
I mean, Adrian Ballou is almost like hired, it seems like, to just be a wild card. Like, we need a wild card. And that's
Yeah,
what a cool gig that is.
no shit. Like come in and just play outside of the lines,
Yeah, just stretch this
mess
thing.
this up for us. Yeah.
Nels is kind of like that. Nels is definitely like that, actually.
We're going to get into that Nels Klein stuff. But, it's funny what you mentioned Baloo, because I did read that on the David Bowie record, Lodger, on that song Red Sails, that solo, he didn't even have the song in his headphones.
Some Eno thinking.
Yeah, like maybe they just gave him the click for it or the drums or something, but there was no melodic or tonal reference of where the song was. They just let him be I'm sorry, Adrian Ballou. And then
Right.
they put that in the song, and there it is.
And also, like, there's stuff like on that Talking Heads record on Remain
Oh,
Alive,
yeah.
that first song with that insane solo.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I don't know the song, but I don't know the
Computer
name, but I know.
malfunctioning sounding thing.
Yeah.
I've heard that was he was playing and Eno was like messing with a delay, like a primetime delay or something at the
Wow.
same time, and they were just like improvising that way and like spitting stuff back up. And I mean, whatever it takes to get
Yeah,
there,
sure.
and to be the guy who's like, yeah, let's go for it,
Let's do it.
let's do
I
it.
was really
And
excited that he had played in Nine Inch Nails for a while. It didn't work out. And I don't know this exact story why it didn't work out, but I was really excited that he did. And I was like, I thought that was such a cool marriage,
well, from what I understand, he had been going in and working. Like Trent would hire him to come in and just be Adrian
Be
Ballou,
him.
just like, hey, whatever you think this needs, do it. And then they pick and choose, what they used. And I guess it was a lot of textural stuff. But I guess
Okay.
he's on a few Nine Inch Nails records, like woven into the tapestry. I don't know if that's true, but that's also a cool gig.
Yeah. Well, and as far as like old school session guys, like the people we're talking about, there's only a few places that still happens. Los Angeles, where you are, correct?
Yeah.
Um, New York City and Nashville. And I know some of the guys that work in LA. I know Roger Manning, who is a fucking genius wizard, and I love him so
Incredible.
much. Yeah. I imagine, have you worked with Roger?
I know Roger, and
Yeah.
I've like been in the room making music with Roger, but I've never like done a session with him or anything like that.
Man, his partner is like my big sister, Laurel Stearns. I don't know if you
Oh,
know
really?
Laurel.
Oh, I love her too. Yeah, I've known her for a long time.
That we've talked about her a few times on this podcast with Randy Randall and a few other people. But
Oh, yeah. everyone in LA knows her for
Of
sure.
course, she managed my band in the '90s, Hackfish, and anyway, we've
Oh,
just been family ever since. But I was a huge Jellyfish fan. Our band Hackfish was huge Jellyfish bands in the '90s, and goddamn, every time I'm around that guy, I still get weird.
oh
But
yeah, me too. Mode Cookbook is one of the ones that I was like, talk to me about that.
yeah, well, and I've picked his brain a little bit about the sort of that culture in LA, the this sort of studio musician culture and what that's like, and it's always something I've been fascinated about because I've just never done it, but I've wanted to. I mean, I've had sessions. I mean, just the other day, I played lead on a metal record. They wanted me to, from my Guar stuff, they wanted me to come do that. And I just did it here at Austin and send it off. But it's not like that, what you were saying, when you go in and somebody gives you the direction of, we want this in the style of blah, blah, blah. And you just have to think on your feet and go, okay, well, I can pull that out. That's really interesting to me.
Well, I mean, and you're right about. I think those are like the last cities, at least in America, that have a enough happening financially to maybe
Sure.
make have people still have careers doing that. But I feel
Yeah.
like even there's a handful of people who do it
Yeah.
now, where it used to be, in the golden age of this, it sounds like in the 60s and 70s, there were the people who got every gig you would think, and then there were like 100 more on each instrument who were getting gigs and making a living too because there was just that much work. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Right.
And now I think it's like there's 5 or 6 guys on each instrument, 5 or 6
Sure.
people, and they're not even all working all the time. It's
Right.
just different. It's just different.
It's getting harder and harder. Musicians are always one. Musicians get fucked first.
Yeah.
They just do.
Oh, oh yeah. Yeah. First and last. They get
Yeah,
fucked
at
first
first
and
and
last.
last. I made the analogy with, I was making records when, and it sounds like such boomer shaking my fist at the sky bullshit, but when records were free, this thing that we worked on, and one day you were at work and they came in and said, oh, this thing you make, and it's free now.
Yeah.
So then you used to tour to promote the record, and now the record is basically a flyer for the tour. And you
Right.
go and your living is made from touring and selling merchandise. I read a thing, the bassist from Exodus the other day said that he's basically a merchandise salesman now. That's what he does. And it's like, that's kind
Yeah.
of true. You're a
That's
merchandiser.
pretty much it. And I mean, even that part is getting harder and harder, especially
Sure.
since pandemic. Like coming back and finding out how much like buses cost now to rent.
Oh my God. No, it's my eyes start watering when I see that shit.
Yeah, man, I bet. And it's
Yeah.
like, I mean, everything's so expensive. Gas is so the entire ecosystem of it has shifted so much. It's like I feel like at this point, it's back to like not for everybody, but for a certain bracket down. It's like it's just kind of about like how badly you want to do it,
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
instead of you have to really take any of your hopes for the future with a grain of salt for yourself. Just there's such a dose of realism now, which I guess there always has been, but
I think you're right. And I think it gets harder and harder. I think it's still 1,000% work beats working a day job if you can make a living at it, even if that living becomes, it's easy for me to say, and I understand. I will be the first one to call that out because fortunately Rise Against sort of got in as that door was shutting on like the old school way that bands sort of tour and
and the way labels work.
yeah, but it's still a life in the arts is, in my opinion, the greatest life. And I think any musician would say the same thing. So I want to go through you sent me an email. I want to go through it a bit of the various projects you have worked in. And when we get to the end of it, I would like to ask you what for you stands out, some of them that stand out, some of the most creatively fulfilling, maybe some of the more difficult. So we have
Okay, and I
Cigar.
might be adding some to the conversation because I just kind of sent you the things that like I thought you might give you an impression of what I do.
Have that. Okay. So Cigar, which is the band that we have played with before, and that's Fat Wreck puts that band out. That band's great. Your drummer is also with the Shins, that
Right.
plays in the Shins. You as well played in the Shins. You've subbed for the Shins, correct?
I did. Yep.
Yep. Okay.
Several years ago, I filled in for a couple of months while the bass player was on paternity leave for his
Rad.
first. he was having his first baby. So I got to do that. And that was the reason I did that was because I'd already done the band Broken Bells with
Oh,
the singer, with James
well,
Mercer
yeah, of
a
course.
few
And
years before
Danger
that.
Mouse.
And
Yeah.
Danger
Okay.
Mouse, correct.
Well, so there we go. Okay.
Yeah.
So we have My Name is Rar Rar, which is early 2000 Chicago no wave weirdness.
Yeah.
Dot Hacker, which was with Josh Klinghoffer from Red Hot Chili Peppers and Pearl Jam.
Yeah.
You played with Zach Hill, who's drummer for Hella, Death Grips.
Yep. And
You
I
played
played in Hella too for a while. The
Jesus.
band Hella.
It goes on and on. Oh, and so this was with you on bass, Chino from Deftones on back vocals. You played with Nora Jones.
Yeah, that was a Danger Mouse thing. He
Amazing.
invited me in, and I did like a song, and it ended up being making the record, and it was fun.
So you played with the Flying Lutenbachers.
Yeah.
Anywhere, which is psych rock supergroup. You played with Damsel, which is free improv with you and Nels Klein and Zach Hill. For those who don't know, Zach Hill is oh God, I mean, he's a drummer. He's a phenom. He's amazing. Does very unique things. He'll play with broken pieces of gear. He'll do things like that. He's also just an amazing to watch, but he's sort of like I would say improv, maybe adjacent to jazz, but not really rock loud, but yeah,
He's
amazing.
his own thing. I feel like he's almost like not only a genre of drumming unto himself, but he's almost kind of like a genre of music to himself. Just
I would
because
agree with that.
it's hard to explain, but I guess when you've heard a few of his things, you talk about a signature voice.
Yeah, you're right. It's exactly the people we were just talking about. If Zach Hill's going to play on your thing, it's very discernibly Zach Hill. You're going to hire him to play like Zach Hill. He's not a guy that's going to go play and like say the Foo Fighters or something like that.
Oh no, no, and he's made that choice. I mean, and as much as I've known anybody to be a pure artist, he's the guy.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's all for the expression and for the art and for whatever he's trying to put out there. That's it.
Sure.
Like he's inventing his own chops to practice
Sure.
to get to where he wants to go. He's not like sitting around learning like Bernard Purdie beats or something.
You meet those guys, though, the real originals. I think you realize that the guys that you've been ringing about your whole life were those guys. You know what I mean? And now you've just met one, and it's like, oh, this guy was going to do this no matter what. He happens to be making a career doing it.
Yeah.
But he also, if he was just tucked away in a house in like Iowa or something, he would still be, this is who this person is.
Yeah. He's part of a legacy that would probably be more like, I don't know, Captain Beefheart and Cecil Taylor and
that's a great way to put that.
Milford Graves or like
Fred Frith.
Fred Frith is so versatile though and knows how to do so many different musical things though. He's my God. I mean,
but you get those Fred Frith things where he's got like the felt pieces on the guitar strings and stuff, and he's just kind of doing that for 30 minutes. He doesn't give a shit. He doesn't care, which is great.
He's the king, man. He's the king.
Is. Okay, so Vertical Scratchers, which was you and John Schmerzel, friend of the shows. I love John Schmerzel.
Me too.
Marnie Stern, who, geez, amazing guitar player. She was in the house band on the Seth Meyers 8G band for a long time. I don't see her on there anymore.
No, I think she's not doing that anymore. And she just put out a solo record for the first time in like a decade or something. And It's awesome. So I think she's back to doing her own thing. And incidentally, I just read last week that the Seth Meyers band is getting cut. They're like,
no kidding.
Speaking of what we were talking about, I think they made budget cuts, and so the band went.
I wonder, I did notice Les Savy Fav were busy again and, put out a record and were touring and stuff. So I wonder if it has anything to do with that. But, that was what was so great about that before, and leave it to Fred Armisen to put guys from the Les Savy Fav and Les Savy Fav, from Les Savy Fav and Marnie Stern. I just thought that was great.
Yeah, me too.
Well, that's a shame.
I like that. I like the rotating drummer thing they do too.
Yeah, it's amazing. That's a real shame. Okay, so Sweetheads, you and Troy Van Leeuwen and his wife. Troy Van Leeuwen. I met Troy. I never met him before, even though we crossed paths so many times. I'm a huge Failure fan. I do love Queens of the Stone Age. And I got to tell him, I was like, I'm a huge Failure fan. And he just joking with me. He's like, are you saying I'm a failure? I was like, no, I'm saying, he goes, no, dude, that's my little trick that I say with her. But he was Completely gracious. I'd love to talk to him as well.
He's just a mensch. He's like one of the best. I love that
What a
guy.
great guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's the end of this list that you sent. But I mean, Jesus Christ, Jonathan, like that is a very impressive list. Oh, and the first thing was
Or Evie
what was
Kane.
yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the bands that it's one that I
Evie
was.
Kane. Evie Kane,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and that's not really doing that much right now, but we want to start again. It's the drummer from John Sortland from Cigar and the Shins, and I and our friend Brian, and it's like another trio, but it's a lot different than Cigar. It's like more in the Police,
Yeah, sure.
prog rock Police or something.
So what is next for you? What do you have coming up? Like what is primarily keeping you busy right now?
The thing I'm most excited about that's happening right now is I'm putting out a solo release, my first one ever, of like this abstract, improvised, kind of almost noise music on a cassette label. A friend of mine, I'm in a band when it happens called The Sound of Animals Fighting, which is like a kind of a math emo, I don't know, extreme band.
Uh-huh.
Goes through all kinds of genres, and it's kind of a super group-ish kind of thing. It's like guys from RX Bandits and Anthony Green from Circus Survive and all those
Yeah,
bands.
yeah, yeah.
And one of the guys, Rich from that band, has a cassette avant-garde cassette noise label, and I'm putting out a cassette on that of some
Wow.
improvised stuff I did ages ago, like 15 years ago, that I've always wanted to do something with, and he gave me the opportunity. So that's coming out, like, I think that comes out today.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited about it, but it's like I went through a long time, and I'm still there. Like, if there's one thing that's been a thread through my musical interests is experimental stuff, like
Right.
abstract experimental music, be it classical, jazz. Anybody who's really pushing the limits of either their genre or their playing or their instrument or whatever it is. I mean, I'm not a snob about it. I'm not. I love pop music too, and people do it in every genre, you know. But the really like kind of no apologies, art for art's sake stuff is
Right.
I've always had an affinity for. I mean, there was all that stuff in the 80s, like that was kind of, people call it like the knitting factory scene
Like
in New York.
Ardo Lindsay and things like that.
Yeah, and no wave. New York really had it going on in the 70s and 80s, you know,
Sure.
between no wave and the free jazz scene and the kind of like the Zodic records, Tonic,
Absolutely. Yeah.
you know, Roulette, all those places. And I worship those people. I
Sure.
moved to Chicago to be around that. I moved from Nebraska to Chicago to be around, because that was a hotbed of that stuff, and it still kind of
Right.
is, but it definitely was in the 90s. And I went there to just like be able to see U.S. Maple all the time. I don't know if you know the band,
I know of. Yeah, yeah.
and Lake of Dracula and the Flying Lutenbachers and
Yeah.
Azita. You know, there was just, and all these improvising people like Kevin Drum and you know, Fred Lomberg Holm, and there was just so much going on, and that was what I loved. You
You
know,
know, I don't mean to interrupt, but coming from your background and what you've told me and your resume, how did a band like Cigar come up for you?
that was, I played a lot and done a lot of music with the drummer John,
Sure.
and including that Evie Kane band. That's one of the things that we'd done previously, and he'd been in Cigar 20 years back. You know, like in the
Oh,
late
okay.
90s. And that was a band, they put out a record in 99, I believe, or
Sure.
98, somewhere in there. Then it kind of, you know, life happened to everybody, and they slowed way down on it. They kind of stopped doing it for
Yeah.
ages. And then they had some offers to do some things just, you know, in the, I don't know, 2019-ish, and right before the pandemic. And they had some songs that they wanted to work on. and the bass player couldn't do it. He had a family, has a family, and so they just called and said, John was like, "Hey, do you want to come try this?" And just it was kind of going to be a fill-in thing, as
Sure.
so I thought. I don't know if you know that band's discography. That well, there's only 2 records, but the first one, the bass player Jason Torbert, who's amazing, he kind of set up this role for the bass in that music, in that genre that was a little different. He played fingerstyle. He was like a Rush fanatic,
Oh,
that
okay.
is a
Yeah,
Rush
yeah,
fanatic,
yeah. Yeah.
kind of a prog rock fusion
Which is great.
guy.
That's great.
And
Yeah.
so he came at it from there back in the 90s. And he was doing all this really melodic, I don't want to say lead bass, but it was definitely like, it was like he didn't know the genre when he started. They pulled him in and they did the same thing they did with me, it sounds like, where they showed him RKL and they showed him probably, I would think, strung out and some
Mm-hmm.
of the no effects stuff and showed like, hey, look, there's room for that instrument in this stuff. It doesn't just have to be, it can be colorful. And he really took it and ran with it on that first record and really made a spot for the bass in that band. And then when he wasn't going to come back, they came to me, I guess, probably because of the finger style thing and because
They needed a guy that could play, that could do it.
they could do it and that had the right approach, I guess,
Right.
like to kind of pull it in a little bit of a different direction. And
Right. It wasn't just pulling from punk rock influence or whatever. This guy was taking it from other places. And you sort of understood the source material. You weren't just a punker.
not a punker at all, or it wasn't at all. I mean, when I was growing up, punk rock to me was and kind of is still the Minutemen,
Sure.
No Means No, certain hardcore
Absolutely.
stuff, Bad Brains, and
Hmm.
in the mid to late '90s when those guys were into Pennywise and No Effects and Lagwagon, whatever else there was then. I was not. I was in the Midwest listening to like Brainiac and
Sure.
Thinking Fellers Union, and
Yeah.
that's kind of where I was. Dogface Hermans and Trenchmouth, and you know,
Dogface Hermans. You know what's funny? You just mentioned No Means No and Dogface Hermans. So I don't know if you know this. The drummer from Dogface Hermans and Andy Kerr from No Means No, who I interviewed on here last season, and I still can't believe I did it. They had a band. They both live in Amsterdam, and they had a band called Two Pinned In, and it's drummer from Dogface Hermans plays guitar. So it's
what?
just guitar. There's no drums. There's no bass. I know. And it's Andy Kerr singing, and it sounds like No Means No with no drums and no bass. It's unbelievable. I have to send it to you. I I
Please.
punished Andy Kerr about it, and it blew him away. He's like, "You know that band?" Because it was up on iTunes for a while, and then I think you could still find it on Spotify. But it's just called Two Pinned In, and it's amazing,
What?
amazing.
I had no concept
Yeah.
of. Wow.
When we
Okay.
get off here, I'll try to find it and send it to you. But
Oh
yeah,
my god.
yeah,
I'm just happy you know the Dog Faced Hermans.
yeah.
That show, I saw them play in my hometown of Lincoln, Nebraska, in a coffee shop in like '95 or something,
Wow.
and it to this minute was the best thing I've ever seen. The best
No
show,
shit.
the best band, the best show I've ever seen. I mean, Prince is like a close second. There's like,
Sure.
there's some good stuff, but that band is still like it like changed my life.
Wow.
The Dog Faced
Wow. Wow.
Hermits,
Wow.
incredible, and it feels like almost completely forgotten. Like when I talk to somebody who even knows that band, it's I have an affinity,
Well, there was so much great stuff in the '90s, man, and it was so much that was sort of a throwback to what the original idea of punk rock was. You know, like from No Means No to Jesus Lizard to Dogface Hermans. It was all this. I guess at that point, the sort of the name was alternative music. It all fit under that umbrella.
Right,
But the like things that had SST records that started and stuff like that. So it was like we were getting back to that. There was no real genre specifically. It was all just alternative music, which in the '80s and '70s it was all just punk music. And under that umbrella, you got to be There was John McGeoch from Magazine and Susie Sue. There was Keith Levine from Public Image Limited, or even Jaw Wobble. There was all these musicians that were quote unquote punk rock musicians, or Geordie Walker from Killing Joke, punk rock musicians, but just doing this like what we were just saying with Zach Hill. They were completely unto themselves and had their own world, their own universe. So we'll switch a little bit and talk about gear. Being a guy that's played in so much different types of music, do you have like a go-to sort of bass, or do you take a bunch of different ones, like you were saying with the band? If they might want a hollow body with flat wounds, or do you just like, I'm just going to take my P bass or whatever it might be?
Well, it's funny because I grew up like trying to be the most kind of going for the most peculiar gear I could find and the most bizarre shit. And that served me well for a long time. Like for a while, my main thing was a Roland synth bass.
Oh, rad.
Like an 80s one. It was like an electric bass with strings and everything in this bizarro shape with this weird bar that goes across the top.
Oh, I've seen those. Yeah, I've seen those. Yeah. Sure.
And it had this like 24 pin cable connection, and it went into a big floorboard, like it's like 2.5 feet wide, like this huge thing that was an analog synth.
Wow.
It was digitally controlled. So you could program sounds and save them. And you had these big stomp pedals that you'd like get to your presets on. And you could mix bass into it, or you could just be total synth or whatever. And I used that all the time. And just because you could just throw in bizarre sounds. There's bands where I never even played bass sounds at all. It was just synth sounds, but I was doing the bass roll or whatever. And I did that in Hella. I did that in My Name is Rar Rar. I played that a lot. And I had just weird guitars. I have a bunch of weird vintage, like kind of cheapos, like weird old hollow bodies that I use still. But lately, I've just kind of gotten into the idea of just starting with something that I know is going to sound good to like, that's going to work most of the time. And then kind of let the creativity be either from my head or through pedals.
Right.
I have a lot of pedals. I've always been into that. And so I like the modular aspect of that, where you can just be like, this needs a little more of this and that. And you just kind of put the thing in, plug it in, and you go.
Are you a P bass, jazz bass guy now, or?
P bass.
P bass, yeah.
Yeah, I have an old 73 that's beat to hell, and I love it. And I use that. At this point, I use that like probably 95% of the time,
It's the standards, it's like you try to move on, you try to do other stuff, and you just,
that's the thing. And again, maybe it's that Mark Rebo, Nels Cline thing where it's like, Mark Rebo sounds like Mark Rebo, whatever he's playing, I'm sure, but the fact that it's a beat up old Telecaster doesn't hurt.
Sure. Yeah.
Or Nels, same way. It's like that old jazz master. It's like, it's kind of tried and true, and it's a good palette to start from. It's a solid spot. And I think the P bass for bass playing is that.
We could do a whole other podcast about Nels Cline and pick your brain about that. I still think his solo Inside with the Seeds, the Wilco song, is one of the greatest rock guitar solos I've ever heard in my life.
He has a couple of those in Wilco.
He really does.
He's so cool. The first time I saw him play, I was aware of him because of all the Knitting Factory stuff, all his weird stuff. Like I knew his name and I knew a little bit about him, but it wasn't until he was playing with Mike Watt.
Right.
In the 90s. I saw him on one of those tours for like a solo Mike Watt tour after he started doing his own records and Firehose broke up. And Nels was his guitar player, and he brought all of his Nelsness to that. And it was kind of like this amazing marriage, I thought, between all their mentality, all their,
Another player like we were just talking about, Nels Cline is Nels Cline and Wilco. They knew he was going to be Nels Cline. Wilco were such a discernible voice at the time he joined the band. I was so inspired by that. And yet they knew that they were getting with him and they took him in. It was like when Morello played with the E Street Band. You know, they were
Right.
knew they were getting Tom Morello, and he was going to do his Tom Morello thing, but that it still worked. And I thought that was such a cool creative swing for both bands. But man, the way Nels Klein sort of assimilated into Wilco was just astounding. I thought.
Well,
Yeah.
the fact that Wilco was doing what they did, and then there was that big shakeup kind of in the band, and they had Jim O'Rourke produce that record that kind of like
Right.
set them down that new path. And then right after that, they hired Nels and Glenn Cochi, who's
Right.
who's a one of the more creative drummers. And like what a an amazing move. And then I remember pretty quickly, like I went and saw Wilco right around then, maybe their first tour with those guys or the second tour, like pretty early in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And Deerhoof was their opening band. And that I knew those guys, they were friends of mine. I've known them forever, but the fact that Deerhoof was like the kind of band Wilco was taking out on
Mhm.
tour at the time, it was just like, okay, Wilco's on some new shit right now.
I loved Deerhoof, but they really won me over when their drummer did like a COVID record of him playing Voivod's Angel Rat record acoustically. He sang it, he played the whole thing, and he released it himself like on Bandcamp. And I
I
thought
remember
that was so fucking amazing because it's one of my Voivod, one of my favorite bands. And anyway, I just thought that's neither here nor there. I usually ask everybody on here, do you have one that got away? Do you have like a piece of gear from touring that you either hawked or it got stolen, or you just don't have anymore and you wish you still had?
there's
It's
a
an interesting question because there's this response, and if there's this response, that means you're doing all right. But then there's people that are like immediately, even before I can get it out, they're like, man, they know exactly they had this thing that they lost, they got rid of. And then there's guys that have been touring their whole lives and they never had anything stolen. Greg Norton from Hischke-Dot, nothing ever stolen. He has every piece of gear he ever had. I was amazed by
really
that. I couldn't believe it. Yeah,
that's pretty good.
it's crazy.
I don't know if I've ever had anything stolen. Actually, I've
Congratulations.
I've lost stuff. I've lent stuff away and never gotten it back or forgotten where it is. But I don't. There was never that like it was there 1 minute and I turned my back and it was gone the next, or I after the gig it had walked out the back door. I don't think I've ever had. I can't remember if I've ever had that. Maybe it's happened and I'm not remembering it. But as far as anything I regret missing, I not really because I'm not that. I don't get that attached. I mean,
I think that's important.
if my P bass went missing, I'd be bummed. But
Sure.
because it's just, I don't know, it just because I love it and it sounds good.
Well, there's those instruments too. You play better. You just play. It's like
Right.
a poor musician blames the instrument. It's like, well, no, I've had guitars where I had better shows because I played that guitar.
Yeah. Oh,
I
yeah.
know it.
Yeah.
Like the
Absolutely.
way it sounded, the way it played. I was doing a better job.
Right. And there's things, I suppose there's things like little pieces of equipment like pedals or amps or something where I I I might have let go of them prematurely because
Sure.
there's that thing of like I have like drawers full of pedals, and a lot of times I'm like, that's kind of mediocre. I don't know. Maybe it'll come in handy sometime, and then I'll pull it back out later in life and be like, "What the? This is awesome! Like, what was
Yeah.
I thinking? This thing.
Yeah.
What was? Your tastes change and your mentality changes a little bit, and then you realize that
You're in
there's
a different spot.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so I try not to get rid of stuff that I think might be useful at
Yeah.
some point.
Yeah.
So that's been good. But as far as just like having that magical bass or that magical thing and losing it, that hasn't happened yet. So
Oh, well, consider yourself lucky. Jonathan Hischke, thank you so much for talking to me, man. I've taken up an hour of your time and I really, really appreciate it.
Such a pleasure, man.
Yeah, congratulations with the solo record, and everybody look
Thank
into
you.
that. And I'll probably see you out there.
Yeah, I hope so, man. Take care.
All right, talk to you soon, Jonathan. There you go, folks. Man, what a career. And you know, he has that career because you heard right there what a great guy he is. You know, I would say 80% of this whole business is just being a likable individual, you know, showing up and being someone that people want to be around. I met Jonathan in person, but after that conversation, I'd love to sit there and talk. I could have talked to him all day. Like I said, I know him from his punk rock band. They're called Cigar. I have a record out on Fat Records that just came out in 2022 called The Visitor. I'm going to leave you with a great example of Jonathan's playing. And this is just a snippet of what this guy's capable of. This is the song These Chances off of that Cigar record. Very much more of a sort of punk rock flavor. But man, do yourself a favor and listen to any of the bands that we have mentioned, from My Name is Rah Rah to Dot Hacker to Zach Hill to his Nora Jones stuff, his Flying Lutenbachers, Anywhere, Damsel, Vertical Scratchers, Marnie Stern, Sweethead. I mean, the guy's just played with everybody. Sweethead is with Troy Van Leeuwen from Queens of the Stone Age and from Failure. Again, I'm creatively jealous of this guy. I have creative FOMO, and I've met a few of those dudes. And like with so many of these conversations, if you're a listener of this, we sort of bring all roads back to early punk rock, to the real punk rock, so to speak, when it was genreless, when it wasn't clearly defined. People were sort of, it was a wild, wild west, and people were just creating. That's the kind of punk I would like to get back to, my friends. Anyway, so check out Jonathan Hischke. Thanks for listening. I'm going to thank the folks at Jim Dunlop and MXR Pedals. Find out what they're doing over at jimdunlop.com. I'm going to thank the people at DistroKid for supporting us. They're helping you get your work on the streaming platforms. They're cutting out the middleman. They're doing great work over there. Thanks for listening, folks. Thanks for tuning in. I'm going to keep making them. We'll talk to you soon.